Brilliant to see so many people entering today. Give it one more minute and then we can start. Great, okay, I'm going to make a start now. Thank you everybody for coming to our conference today. I'm Rebecca Gill. I'm proud to be Rosa's CEO and your host of this morning's session. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to Rosa's annual summer conference of 2024. We've got a really packed agenda, which we hope you find inspiring and motivating. And our aim is for you to leave today feeling connected to women's and girls' organisations across the UK and feeling and knowing that you are part of a vibrant and passionate sector. As many of you know, Rosa is the only UK funder dedicating to investing in, supporting and championing the women and girls sector. And part of our mission is to raise funding to invest in women's and girls organisations like yours and to influence other funders to do the same. And part of the way in which we do that is to provide evidence and data on the challenges that the organisations like yours face. And last week we launched our Women and Girls Sector Survey to help us gather insights about the sector. And we really need your responses to help to make this the largest survey of the sector in recent years and to support our efforts to share the challenges so many of you face with a wider audience. So this is my appeal to you all today, to please use the link that will be in the chat now to complete the survey and to share it. And we'll probably be banging on about that survey all day today because we are very, very keen to make this as big as possible. And today's focus of the conference is on connection to individuals, to organisations and to the wider women and girls sector. So we've got a poll for you to complete during the session to understand how connected you feel to the sector. And I'm going to invite my colleague Sarah to post the poll in the chat. And while you complete it, I've got a few technical points that I need to share with you. And I've just managed to freeze my screen, so I can't actually share the technical points with you. Hang on a second. Right. Nope. Hang on a sec. So some sessions today will be held in a webinar format, which means only the speakers are visible and all questions are invited in writing. And some sessions today, like this one, are in meeting format where you can see speakers and attendees. And what we would ask is that you keep your video on and your mic off, unless you're invited to ask a question, because that's really helpful to seeing who's there and to helping us make those connections. Almost all sessions will be recorded, although not the networking sessions, and recordings are available on our site for a month until the 26th of July. And finally, today I'd like to thank Cummins, one of Rosa's most loyal and generous funders who have funded our conference for the last 7 years. And we're delighted to have several Cummins staff joining the conference today. So now I'm delighted to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today. I'd like to welcome Esua Goldsmith. Esua is a British-Ghanaian author, campaigner, feminist and activist. And you can read more about Esua's life on her website and in her acclaimed memoir. Esua has played a critical role in the feminist movement and the women's sector for decades, both in the UK and around the globe. Esua is a connector, she's a convener, she brings people together, she helps to facilitate vital conversations and to help people to find common ground. And she does this from a place of principle, with great politics and enormous passion and great fashion. And obviously, I think she should actually be running the country. But for now, I'm very delighted that she's here to talk to us about inspiring intergenerational connections There is no better woman for the role. So welcome, Esua. Oh, you're on mute, Esma. That's...
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. Thank you for that excellent introduction, Becky. And yeah, great fashion yourself. We're all looking very fine today. And thank you very much for inviting me to kick off your fabulous conference. It's wonderful. I can remember being in the gathering when Rosa was launched back in the day. So I saw you when you were a baby, which is really exciting to see where you've come from and where you're going. And I'd like to first of all, pay tribute to everybody who's here. And I'm just looking down the list of just some of the organizations represented at the conference and some of the people that Rosa funds. You know, you've got maternity and reproductive rights, Black and Asian and minoritized women and girls. And you've got women with disabilities, refugees and asylum seekers, older and younger women, violence against women and girls, and the housing and homelessness sector, low income, women's rights and representation. It's just a fantastic demonstration of the breadth and depth of the women's sector today. And it's really exciting. And I'll be talking about my take on how our sector and our movement has evolved in the next 25 minutes, and how it's evolved over time, and how I think intergenerational dialogue can really help us to become inspired and envision what's possible. And I think that's really very much needed in these difficult times, to give us that hope and inspiration. And I think I'll be talking about inspiring intergenerational insights across the women and girls sector. And I think if we go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a lot of important things about intergenerational feminism, which makes it valuable. I'm a big fan, of course. It's inclusive by definition, all ages welcome. And it builds on what's gone before and multiplies possibilities for the future, rather than thinking of it as something that happened in the past and we've now moved on from. And we can learn from each other if we really open up and learn from our mistakes and triumphs and really listen to each other. And delight in diversity. We don't all agree about everything, and we don't need to. That's what keeps our movement alive and kicking, that we can argue with each other and that we have many, many strands. There are many feminisms, and that's what makes it so vibrant. And that increases the possibility for solidarity across generations. And also, more important for me, I think, than anything, as an amateur historian, I like to think that we can write our own her story. That, you know, we have been written out of history for so long, and that by joining up our intergenerational stories, we can get a complete picture. And inspiration actually literally means to breathe in. So we can inhale that oxygen of our collective experience, and that will breathe new life into our movement, knowing that change can and does happen. You know, it rolls back. It's not linear. It can roll back, but we can make change. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to just quote from my memoir, The Space Between Black and White. Knowing who you are and where you're from and your beginnings is the only way you can find out where you're going and who and what you can become. And I believe that goes for individuals, peoples, organizations, and social movements. We need to know our own stories and hear each other's. And as I said, listen to the stories of previous generations. And if you look at the next slide, I just wanted to, anybody here of African and especially West African descent will immediately recognize this symbol. It's literally means go back and get it. And it's a 250-year-old Adinkra symbol from Ghana in West Africa. And it's actually, if you look at the picture, it's a mythical bird. a female bird that flies forward with her head turning backwards. I often feel like that myself, actually. And you can see there's an egg in her beak, and that represents the future. And the idea is we can create the future by understanding the past, not to repeat it, but to learn from it and take anything we need to continue our story. So it's a symbol of hope, and I think it echoes some of the things I'm going to say today. Let's go to the next slide, Jess, because I think I just found this wonderful quote from Angela Davis. So difficult to be hopeful sometimes, but she says, "I rule out pessimism from the outset. The reason why our social movements have lasted so long from generation to generation is because we've got hope for the future, and we can accomplish anything if we come together." And I think that's a really good place to kick off from. And if we look at the next slide, Jess, everybody likes a baby pic. And I just wanted to start from that, 1970s philosophy that the personal is political. And the generation we're all born in into different generations here. And it shapes us, and particularly the time we come of age. And like all of us, my history runs parallel to the changes that I've fought for all my life. And you can see there, that's on the left, there's a picture of my mum, aged 19, she was a single white working class mother with a disability. And I was born in the early 1950s. And I was the only brown kid on the block. She had me in that unmarried mother's home there. Back in the day, people used to end up in unmarried mothers' homes if they were single mothers very often. And my mum was an early feminist, and I think her courage has inspired me all my life, that she refused to give me up for adoption despite the pressure on unmarried women to give up their babies in those days, especially brown babies. That was a bit of a double whammy. But when you met my mum in London, my dad was a Pan-Africanist, anti-racist student from Ghana. He was studying in London, and he went back to Africa without ever having seen me. So I didn't meet my dad until I was 37. And if you look at the next slide, a little picture of Battersea, Clapham Junction back in the day. You can see there wasn't a lot of traffic around, and kids were allowed out to play. You know, we used to hang out in the streets. That was a thing. And I grew up with half my story missing, and I had no books or stories or images that reflected who I was or the way I looked as a little mixed race kid. So I got a lot of racism in the streets and at school, but we need to know our stories to anchor us and make sense of the world. And I realized what a struggle that was for me without that. And I think it's the same in the women's movement. Up until very recently, her story has been deliberately erased or hidden, you know, even though women played a huge contribution to every society. Think about it, you know, we are over half the human race, and yet our stories have often been deliberately erased and missing. Women have been doing stuff. I've just been working on reparations for the European Commission, and finding out how many African queens there were when I was told as a kid that Africa had no civilization, and no buildings even. This is a lie. And I think just knowing our history can give us an enormous sense of empowerment. So can we have the next slide, Jess? Because this is me as a student. I'm modeling Angela Davis's hairdo there. And this is my student's card from 1976. And they say you can't be what you can't see. And I agree that's challenging. But by the time I got to university, I desperately wanted to be what I couldn't see. I wanted women to see women leaders, especially women of color, you know, that were out there speaking out against patriarchy and inequality. And I thought, someone's got to make a start. Lots of women have had courage to do that in the past. So I'm going to do it. And otherwise, how are people ever going to see it? And I just wanted to give you a little flavor of that from my memoir. This is from when I was in the Students' Union. I was 19, and the rugby club had just organised a strip show for Rag Week. Might be still familiar to some of you. And so I got up to protest about it. So I called a motion, "This House is Against Sexism." And I was really terrified because 800 students came to this meeting, and and I think they saw the first three letters of the word sexism and thought this might be interesting. So because nobody even knew what the word meant, we were really breaking new ground. So here I am in full flood. "Call yourselves revolutionaries, socialists, rebels. Sexism is the deadly weapon used by our oppressors to divide us. Is our Students' Union on the side of oppressors, or do we support women's liberation?" Another huge roar goes up from the audience. They know whose side they ought to be on, at least, but I haven't finished yet. "This motion will make sure this kind of thing never happens again. That when we women walk in here, we will be listened to, taken seriously, treated with respect. We deserve that every bit as much as you men do. We are fighting for our freedom. Are you with us? I urge you to vote for this motion and banish sexism from our union forever." A sudden surge of energy and elation courses through me as I raise my clenched fists above my head. There's a fraction of a second's pause, and then, yes, everybody is up on their feet, clapping, shouting, stomping their approval. I realize I've gone well over my 3 minutes, but the speaker's lost count. He just shrugs his shoulders. He can see there's no stopping me. The audience is on my side. "Speeches against? Abstentions?" he asks when the cacophony has subsided. "No? Thought not. Nobody would dare after that performance." Okay, then let's go to a vote. All those in favour, raise your hands. And all the hands are shooting up. I can see the crowd spilling in through the door and out into the foyer, also got their hands raised. Carried, NEMCON. Bang goes the gavel. I turn round to Fran in her usual place on the platform, taking the minutes. And she wrote, "Standing ovation, loud and sustained applause" in the red minute book. We won. And I think the excitement of those days, actually starting to discover this territory, you know, some things we got wrong, some things we missed out, but it was the excitement of being there. And one of the most fantastic intergenerational projects I ever got involved in was I became the first woman of colour and the first woman at Leicester University Students' Union after that. And I met up in 2018 with Rhiannon Lewis, who was the president of Leicester University at the same time. And that was like nearly 40 years between us. And we just talked about what it was like to be a woman student president in those days. And it was like there was not a generation between us. It was like we were both, you know, just exploring the kind of things that we were up against and learning from each other. And, you know, you meet somebody and you just get that immediate click and, you know, the mutual respect. And so it was just wonderful to see the next generation just taking that forward and running with it. Can we just have the next slide, Jess? I wanted to show you here the things we were fighting for back in the day, you know, women's liberation movement and the demands of the 70s, the equal pay, equal education, free contraception, free 24-hour community controlled nurseries. Wow, we are a long way from that. The nursery at the Students' Union in Leicester rang me up a few months ago and said, you know that nursery you set up when you did a sit-in and brought all the kids in and took over the School of Education with all these kids under 5 while their mums went to uni. She said, we're still going 50 years later. And that's the thing, you know, what we do now, what you're doing now is going to leave a lasting legacy. Even if it seems a struggle at the time and you feel you're not getting anywhere, you never know the waves that you're going to make later. And you can see that all of those things we've made some progress on. And of course, you know, violence against women is a huge tsunami of a problem at the moment. But we can see that in those days, that is a program which has lasted through the generations. And of course, you can see immediately what's jumping out of you is what's missing. You know, the intersectionality piece, which, you know, really didn't come on until the 80s, gender identity, international and global dimensions. You know, I spent must be 20 years in and out of the UN process in the 1985 to 95, working on the global platform for action and so on. And, you know, voices from minoritized women and voices from the global south. It wasn't that they weren't happening at the time. It was that, you know, it was like solidarity in silos, that people were, and because of my position, I was able to move through a lot of these groups and understand what was happening and understand where the differences were, but also where we had really common ground. I worked with Akina Mamawa Africa and OWAD and Forward and all those, you know, Black women's groups that did so much at that time in the 70s and 80s. But Jess, if we look at the next slide, there are reasons to be cheerful. You know, we have come a long way. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the stuff that we have done on that platform. You know, the key legislation, you know, the abortion rights, sexual and reproductive rights, equal pay, discrimination, they all were not even in law when I made that speech. And the right to own property, the right to choose same-sex marriage was a dream in those days. And it's, you know, and now some of that is happening, some of that is rolling back, of course, when you think of abortion rights. So you've got to keep on it, you know. As I say, it's not linear. The international frameworks I've already talked about, right from the UN decade up to the Istanbul Protocol on violence. And then the women activists, you know, we've got so many, from, you know, the Dagenham strike up to Me Too, Time's Up, everyday feminism, you know, the rise of the women's sector. The women's sector was not a thing back in the day. We've seen that actually come into, you know, come to flourish and blossom in recent years, where we've got organizations that are focused, run by, with and for women, focus on supporting women's liberation. I like to use that term now. I've always had a soft spot for it. Because it's more than just helping women, it's actually about empowerment. And again, rediscovering our her story, which is really important. Can we have the next slide, Jess? Because I think one of the things that we are able to do in the women's movement is to make allies across social movements. And particularly, I wanted to pick out Black Lives Matter, Opal and Alicia and Patrice, 3 women who've made an amazing difference to the world, especially during lockdown. And that's me on, you know, Wandsworth Black Lives Matter, you know, working at a local level. Those women, you know, led a movement which, you know, in our local area was inspiring and focused, and we could get people, you know, even in Tooting, where I'm living now, we could get people together. And then the sorry, I've seen a message there, but I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. So I just wanted to point out that the feminist movements always found those opportunities to make alliances. When you think back in the day, in the 1800s, the anti-slavery movement was full of feminists. The civil rights movement in the 60s, there was a real crossover between the women's movement and the civil rights movement. The anti-apartheid movement, I spent most of my time in that movement. If anybody had said to me, do you think apartheid will end in your lifetime? I'd have said, well, I hope so. But, you know, it wasn't certain. But I think we work for the day when freedom happens. What we're doing now may not happen in our lifetime, but we're working, you know, we're working towards that. And of course, the environment movement today is another example of how feminists have really led in all of those movements. And of course, we're against the backdrop of a really difficult and challenging time. Jess, can we see the next slide? Look at that list of what we're up against now. The economy, climate change, after effects of Brexit, war, the crisis in almost every institution in the UK. That's, I think the UK is particularly struggling, but I work a lot in Europe, I work a lot across the world, and everybody's struggling. And then the crisis in democracy and the backlash against women leaders. Back in the day, I think there was something like, I don't know, 13 women in MPs or something in the 70s, but a very, very small number. And of course, that now we have over 30%. It's a backlash against women leaders, and particularly when you look at what's happened to Diane Abbott and Jo Cox, it's a difficult situation, really, really difficult. And all the, you know, racism and misogynoir and related to that, and the rise of incel along the involuntary celibate movement. I was on a panel about that the other day, talking about how feminists are struggling against that. And of course, the absolute game changer, which back in the day we didn't have, was the AI and the technology, social media harassment. Social media is a double-edged sword, you know, for us. It's it brings in connections all over the world, which are absolutely wonderful, but at the same time opens us up to the most vicious amounts of harassment. And then, of course, who's picking up the pieces for all this? The underfunding and over demand in the women's sector. Very often, the women bear the brunt of all that crisis. Can we go on to the next slide, Jess? Because here you can see that this makes intergenerational dialogue particularly challenging for us in this climate. I think the vested interests of the patriarchy, you know, they set up these bogus cultural wars, you know, pitting one generation against another, you know, and so that we can't talk to each other. They're saying that, you know, the Gen Z is against and Gen X and against the baby boomers, and one lot's got loads of you know, property and housing and free education, and stoking all that false intergenerational culture wars. And the political policies that are deliberately designed to set us up in competition with each other, and make us feel that we're to blame, each generation's to blame for the other's deprivation, instead of seeing this as a deliberate policy. And we go on to the next slide, we can see really what's at the roots of this. The big four roots of oppression: patriarchy, white supremacy, speciesism, and capitalism. Every generation is up against that, and you know, it plays out differently for each generation, so we need to look at that. I mean, you know, back in the day, in the 70s, when I was in the women's liberation movement there at university, we had a 3-day week. You know, we had an enormous crisis in the economy, and we're all going around with candles because of the miners' strike and so on. So you can see these big four are at play, and we can see now that they interact together, these global forces, to create a small, wealthy, powerful global elite, mostly male, mostly white, and from the global north. And Oxfam says in 2023, the richest 1% bagged nearly twice as much wealth as the rest of the world put together. And as every generation is working in that context, wherever we live in the world, I've done loads of work in Africa, in India, in Latin America, whatever community we come from, that's what's at play. And you can see it working out differently. And we share this struggle, and intergenerational stories as how it's played out for us help us to understand it better and fight against it. Can we have the next slide, Jess? Waves of feminism. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with this. This has kind of been coined to denote different generations of the women's movement and what was a priority for us within that context of sometimes crisis, but always that world system. You know, and the first wave was focused on the property rights, right to vote, and the second wave in the 1970s, equality and anti-discrimination. Third wave, we, out in the world, much more focus on diversity, intersectionality, internationalism, in response to the perceived, very white, middle-class, women-dominated. I don't think that was ever the case, but that's the way it was portrayed. But certainly by the third wave, we were on it. And then in the 2000s, we've got the fourth wave, which is here, in this century, with the social media. I don't know, I was reading about the fifth wave and the sixth wave and the seventh wave. I'm just thinking now, are we waving or are we drowning? Again, it's quite Eurocentric, and it's like, if you were born between the waves, tough, nothing happened. Whereas actually we know plenty happens, and there's a baby girl born every minute. So, their generations are being generated every minute. So these global things that are happening and what happens between each of the waves becomes invisible when actually there's plenty happening and there's plenty of history in the making. And this sort of pits us a bit in competition with each other, and we're all dissing each other depending on what wave we're in. It seems to me we need to have a continuum, and it's been co-opted again by politicians to set us up against each other. So if we go to the next slide, I think, that wave theory, it seems to me, is just not fair. We need to demand intergenerational justice and equality for all generations and equity for all generations. We need kind of a life cycle approach to policy that distributes the resources and well-being at all stages of women's lives, and not says, well, if one generation gets it, the other doesn't. That is just, that is just pitting us against each other. I like Kimberly Springer's idea. She's an African-American philosopher and feminist, and she says we should see ourselves not as waves, but as a mighty river that doesn't stay the same. It's continually changing, continually flowing. Every generation comes up with new ideas, and what's more, you get the multiplicity of feminisms contributing to the whole. You get tributaries, you get tributaries, you get streams, you get when one mighty river meets each other, another, like, in the Sudan, the White Nile and what is it? The two Niles. Anyway, so that's the idea that she's put forward. And I think what's great about this idea is that it's fantastic to be part of something greater than ourselves, a shared sense of fighting and contributing to common values that we have. And if we look at the next slide, we see bell hooks. That river metaphor gives us hope. And hope is essential to any political struggle for radical change when the overall social climate promotes disillusionment and despair. And that disillusionment and despair is no more prevalent than it is today. And I've been reading about doom scrolling, about the addiction of looking for bad stories. And apparently it takes 5 good stories to eradicate the negative effects of one bad story. 5 good stories. So let's seek out the good stories and frame them as good stories rather than as competing rights, because it seems to me that way we play into the hands of the system. And I think we all share the same dream. If we go to the next slide, we can see that dream of and vision across the generations. Patriarchy, growth, climate degradation, white supremacy and capitalism replaced with caring, sustainability and well-being at the center of our world. And we know feminism when we see it. Have a look at the next slide. You can see we're disruptive, passionate, collective, collaborative, power sharing, cherishing self-awareness and self-care, inclusivity, all the intersectionality, building trust and supporting other women, parity is not the same as feminism. I think there's a misunderstanding that by getting lots of women into power, it means that feminism is accomplished. We know that's not true. This is feminism. Women in power, parity is just and right, and we shouldn't stop campaigning for that. But we should move beyond that and say, this is what we're looking for, and all genders can be feminist if they do this. Can I just have the next slide, please? And I think one of the things that we're rediscovering is self-care. I think successive generations have kind of burnt themselves out, especially in the 80s and 90s. I think, oh my God, we were going for broke. You know, if you weren't working 24/7, you know, you weren't a feminist. And I don't think that's where we started out. We started out in the 70s with the consciousness raising movement. We spent a lot of time just talking to each other in different groups, you know, very small groups, like a kind of political therapy. It was. It was very much working on ourselves, working on our own internalization of a terrible system, and coming out with a much more positive view of the world. So it's not self-indulgence, it's an act of political warfare. And we really need to do it in order to survive. And in fact, we need to do it to the whole world. If you look at the next slide, this is the replacement for the big four, you know, the patriarchy and capitalism, speciesism, and white supremacy. This is what we need instead: self-care, care for each other, care for our communities, and care for the planet as an act of political survival. And when you think of the way the care system is in this country, in the UK, and that's not just the sort of social care system, it's all aspects of caring, of health, of mental health, of social care, of institutions which are supposed to be there to support our welfare. If we can focus the whole of the economy on a care-based economy, you would see a transformation instead of the destructive system that is in place at the moment. And I think if we just go to the last slide, just to finish off, just wanted to quote the late, great Bell Hooks. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination and oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move toward freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. And I think we need to, in these difficult times, think about the feelings that come with being in our movement, the feelings of hope, the feelings of love, the feelings of elation that we get. It's not always that. This is on a good day. This is what we're striving for. And make sure that we go out and contribute that. As I was reading some of what Angela Davis was saying about that hope piece, and thinking, she says, you don't just find it, you have to go out and create it. We have to create this kind of world, not just say it's not going to happen. So thank you, and I'll welcome your questions on all of that. I know I've left a lot out, but I only had 25 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, Esua, you're such a legend, and that was a wonderful presentation, wonderful words. We're getting so much love for you in the chat, and I'm going to encourage people to put their questions in the Q&A box. But I found that, as ever, deeply inspiring. And some of the things that have really landed for me is around this idea that we need to celebrate our diversity, because that increases solidarity across generations. And that is such a critical message for today. But that the change in her story is not linear. And that our story is erased. And I think you talked a lot about the importance of recognising, or the growth of kind of understanding intersectionality after the 70s, and how important that has been, and how erased some of those her stories have been as well. and reminding us that liberation, that the personal is political, that these words, that these phrases, that feminism is not the same as parity, these were all so important for our thinking today, and that hope, you know, that we need to remember hope, and that we need to be out there changing it. And I think that is so, you know, again, such powerful words. And I'm going to invite people to see if they've got any questions or want to ask anything of Esua today. But a lot of people saying, we needed that today, we needed that to help us move forward. And actually, while I'm waiting for people to put some questions in, I just wanted to say that we did our poll. I don't know if anyone in the techie side of today's conference is able to show the poll. But I found it really striking, actually, that thinking about those ideas of hope and kind of what together, you know, we're stronger, is that actually, you know, although 43% of our attendees today said that they're not sure how connected they feel to the wider women and girls sector, actually 40% feel that they are really well or quite well connected. Now that means that we've all got work to do to ensure that we are more connected to each other, but that it is still a good percentage of us do feel that connection as well. And has anyone got any questions for Esua, thinking about so I'll kick off then. Oh, hang on, there's one coming in, I'll see. So can you see the questions, Esua, or should I ask them?
No, could you ask them? Because
Yeah,
it's popping up really quick, so I can't.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Can't catch it.
So Rizwana Balim has asked, I think colonisation is a factor that shapes whole cultures and takes away the her story of many people. Don't you think that we need to teach this?
Yeah, great question. I was hoping somebody would ask me that, because I've just done a whole speech to the European Commission on reparations from a feminist lens. Yeah, because I often think that when people start speaking about global stuff, they forget about feminism. You know, women are over there, whereas actually we're central to that whole debate. And it's led me to read fantastic work by, I don't know if you caught Zainab Badawi's fantastic series on YouTube, where she's literally, you know, going around North, South, East and West Africa, rediscovering and uncovering all the amazing civilizations that there were in the past, and how many queens there were, how many warrior queens were actually running those civilizations, and they were in positions of leadership, you know. And as a kid, I was told there just weren't any buildings in Africa and so on, and you get that whole narrative of white supremacy, which stops us from actually reaching out and seeing what a fantastic history that we have. It's not that women weren't doing anything and never did anything, it's that they deliberately erase it, you know. And that's why I like Women's History Month and Black History Month, because I really enjoy seeing that, you know, that uncovering where people told lies about us and literally eradicated names. And one of the things that I'm doing in my sort of reparation speech was talking about reparations due to women of color, particularly because we had a double, treble exploitation during the days of slavery and indentured slavery, colonialism. And the sort of sexual exploitation on top of all the other inequalities that we experience. So I'm absolutely on it. I'm very steeped in that at the moment. And we've got so much material now that will inspire our little girls of color in schools across the world about how much we can achieve and how proud we can be of our history.
What a fantastic answer, thank you. And I've got a question here from Helen Bendon. Esua, you spoke about generations.
Yeah.
What do you think we can do to support young men to be feminists in the current divisive and binary climate?
That's really interesting. Yeah, there was I think a series on Woman's Hour about talking to young men. I think there's and I've forgotten what her name is, but there's an author and who is a mother of young men, and who has gone out and talked to teenagers who were, and it's quite interesting how thoughtful and sensitive some of the interviews were. And I think this is again a portrayal in the media of, sort of pitting genders against each other, sexes against each other, as well as generations against each other. And I think there's a lot of awareness now among some young men, which is quite different from the awareness in my generation. I think young men have come on a long way, and they've got mothers who are feminists now. So several generations of them. So you can see that there's a lot more in the world which is different. I mean, just the language. People talk about misogyny on the news, and like nobody knew what that was back in the day. What does that mean? So I think there's a whole discourse there that is different. But I think it's about young men helping young men. And I know there's a guy who's doing a consciousness raising circle. I must find out his name and give it to you, Becky, so you can give it to the people here. And he's doing a consciousness raising circle with 8 men together, young men, exploring, as it's for white men, white, young, able-bodied heterosexual men. What can we do to change the world? We're supposed to have the power. What can we do? And so there are caucuses. I think men have to start where we did, in a consciousness raising circle, actually helping each other. We can't do it for them. I don't know what it's like to be a man. I think they need to create those spaces for themselves and start that men's movement, and we need to support them in doing it.
That is such an inspiring answer, because I think it can sometimes get quite sort of lean towards we need to help them. And actually, there's a point about men need to help themselves. Yeah. And that's not about recreating an incel movement. That's about creating something around liberation, and that what they are striving to do is to ensure women's liberation as part of that process. So I found that's such an important answer, Esua. I haven't got much time, and there's a wonderful question here from Javina Green. She says, with so much that affects women and girls, how have you balanced your time with what you advocate for, alongside self-care? And what ways have you found best for taking care of yourself whilst helping others? Esua, what is your story, lady?
Oh, what is my story? Well, you know what? If you feel tired, go dancing. That's what I do. I've just become a trustee for our local disco. We do 60s, 70s and 80s soul. And we all meet once a month and just dance for 5 hours and get to bed by midnight. So I just think I love music and I love dancing. And that is how I find my happy place. And when you're dancing, you just don't think about anything apart from the music and the people that you're with. And if you can find your joy somewhere in that space. So I'm in the little office at the bottom of my garden at the moment. And I sometimes say to my family, oh, I'm just going out to do some work, so don't disturb me. And I come in here, I put Tina Turner on really loud, and I'll just have a dance on my own. So and luckily nobody can hear me. They all think I'm out here, writing away. So I think, we've got to find out our joy factor. So whatever yours is, go do it and give yourself permission.
I think that's wonderful, and I think we might be putting the address of the dancing, the disco.
Get the disco. Come join us.
We'll be available in the lobby later.
Battersea. Yeah, Diaba's Disco. You'll find it on the internet.
There'll be 350 people at the one
Oh,
on Saturday
great.
night.
Come on in.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think I've got to wrap up the session, actually, which I feel really, really sad about, because I think the energy that's coming from you, Esua, is just so profound and so powerful. And I can vouch for the fact, having known you for maybe 25 years, that this has always been the case, and you have always carried with you this passion, this knowledge, this energy, and this capacity to unite people and to connect us. And the love that's coming through the chat, that's coming through the questions, is so powerful. I invite people to look, to download and to buy your memoir, to look at your website, and to connect with Esua as well. She's such a great person to come into organisations and to engage us all in really what matters in the work that we do. And I think, you talked about sexism being a deadly weapon, and we should never forget why we are here. But you also talked about the fact that we never know, and I wrote it down, the waves that we are going to make. And that is what bringing people together, bringing women's organisations together, creating a sector, no progress, no change in women's and girls' lives, in Black women and girls' lives, in Asian women and girls' lives, no change has happened without us, all women, leading that change and stewarding that change. We take 2 steps forward, we take 1 step back. We have to be the ones who steward that progress. And you are such an important example of a woman who has done that from the very, very beginning. And I really thank you for being our keynote speaker, opening our summer conference with such energy and joy.
Thank you. It was brought joy to me. It's made my day, and I'm really glad that you invited me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed being with you all, and I wish you a fantastic day ahead.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're going to close this session, and then at 11 o'clock we'll be opening our session with Voices, which is hearing from women's and girls organisations across the United Kingdom about the work that they are doing in our sector. So I look forward to seeing you at 11 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much, Esua.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.